Um, well, welcome to another episode here of Talking Mental. I'm with the amazing Steph Ng, who is the founder of Body Banter. So, Steph, I'm so excited and so thankful that you've taken the time to come on and have a chat with us because, um, first of all, you're a bundle of energy, and every time I'm with you, I feel like I get a little bit of that, so that always helps. But what's been amazing is the topic that I want to speak with you about is a topic that's come up in quite a passionate, let's put it that way, a passionate um, in a very passionate way. So when I've been working with students, we I will sometimes talk with them about topics that they would like to talk about around mental health,
Mm.
and unequivocally, one of the top topics that come up is body positivity. And I remember I was working
Mhm.
with one school, and I gave them a few ideas, and unanimously, all of the students were passionately wanting to talk about body positivity. So
Hmm.
I know it's a very big topic
Yeah,
with the youth, and of course it is. Then there are many layers to this topic, and
absolutely.
there are many layers to what you've been through and what you do at Body Banter. So I kind of just want to get straight into it because I think this episode
Yeah.
will provide a lot of value, especially to our
Mm.
younger audience who we are looking at targeting a lot more. International
Yeah.
school kids here in Hong Kong, local school kids here in Hong Kong, but youth in general are all sort of wanting to talk about this topic. So, kind of without further ado, maybe we could first maybe just introduce who you are, what you do at Body Banter, and kind of the work and how you got stuck into that.
To a podcast. And it's just, I know we've done so many different types of events together. And every time, as you were saying, our conversations are just so fun to have and so fire. So I'm just excited to have another one of those. Um, yeah. And I think just to give a bit of an introduction to me and what I do, I am a lived experience advocate of body image, body. I would say that I melt different or put together different approaches to um, kind of finding a more peaceful relationship with my body. And I'll explain that a little bit more later. Why body positivity is only one of the many ways that we can kind of approach building a better relationship with our bodies. So I would say I advocate for open mindedness toward the ways that we can approach our bodies in a kinder and more compassionate way. And a lot of my work is centered around helping young people find a sense of curiosity and courage toward this topic. Because for me, as I was experiencing an eating disorder in my teens, one of the biggest barriers to seeking support and also finding more information about eating disorders and body image issues, a lot of the time it wasn't so much that um, I didn't want to talk about it. A lot of the time, it was that there were no conversational frameworks that I had been exposed to in the past. So I just never really had a kind of an open conversation about what it felt like to be in my body with people around me because it just wasn't the norm. And the way that I would like the rest of history to go and the young people of future generations to be able to experience be able to be exposed to these topics earlier and to know that these conversations are okay to have while they may be tough. And to approach those topics, even if it's not easy, with a sense of interest, of curiosity, to explore themselves better.
Yeah,
So yeah, that's one important way that I got into the work, my personal experiences. And then the work that I do today I'm currently pursuing a PhD with Mind HK and Hong Kong U in a joint program together. I'm a Mind HK research fellow, and I work with them on their anti-stigma programming. And their programming really looks at the importance of lived experience stories to bring forward a message of addressing mental health stigma in society. And you know, I think it's a subjective but also objective opinion that when we're able to share our stories openly, we are better able to connect with one another and have more empathy for each other's experiences. So my PhD research looks at how we can create spaces for people and tools for people to be able to share those stories safely and sensitively, in a way that's protective for the storyteller, but also effective in addressing mental health stigma for the general public. So I'm really interested in looking at that from an academic view. And then with Body Banter, it's more of a on the ground level. Body Banter is my charity in Hong Kong that empowers youth to find these conversations and explore these conversations about body image with that sense of curiosity and courage. And it's more related to on the ground level work, getting young people to explore these topics in a hands-on way. So yeah, I think one of the most fulfilling, to wrap up my very long-winded introduction, which I'm now realizing, is to say that is to say that I'm really enjoying that process of looking at the academic side of what it means to be a lived experience storyteller, for myself, even, working with people, but also exploring myself through that research. You know what they say about all research is me search.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome, and it's so great to hear that the work that that's going into this, because we need so many people like yourself to sort of champion that message, because as you put it earlier, and it's very similar to, I think, a lot of people our age, we all went through mental health issues kind of brand new. Like, we didn't have in education around what we were going through, so it was all figuring it out for ourselves. So I think it's really great for the next generation, people like you are around. And I really want to delve into a lot of the frameworks that you had just mentioned around what is good frameworking, how we can get about this, and even more details around the correlation between food and mental health, and how that relationship has affected a lot of people. But before I get into that, I'd like to hear a little bit more about your story, if that's okay. Like, you mentioned it a little bit around your own battle with your body, and what was that like for you?
Yeah. So when I look back and I think about the kind of the environment I was in when I was growing up, and I think it was a time in my teens when things were very chaotic for me in many, many ways. So I think many young people will really resonate with this experience, which is that, social circles are changing, academic stressors are getting more intense, perhaps your relationship with parents are changing, family members are changing. And these are all stressors that perhaps we don't necessarily recognize as such. We're just like, these are part of life, or we don't really see them as important until they really take a toll on our emotional health. And I think a key thing that happened in my teenage life was that I felt like there was no sense of control in my life. And I needed to reestablish that psychologically and emotionally for myself. And the eating disorder, or what the disordered eating and body image issues then later transformed into, which was an eating disorder, was that way of me reestablishing that sense of security, really. Because there are many ways that young people can cope with difficult experiences, and some are more adaptive than others. But I think something that's so important, and I always say to young people, whether they're struggling currently or have previously struggled, is that at any given stage, regardless of what your coping mechanism was or is, you're always trying your best. Your mind and your body are always trying to protect you and give you the best chances of surviving this experience that you're going through. And so, my experience with the eating disorder in my teens was essentially, how can I control my weight, my food intake, the amount of exercise that I'm doing, so I can concretely see that I'm establishing a sense of control in my life, where all the other parts of my life are, so I can numb out or narrow down into this one facet of my life and feel okay. So that's kind of in a nutshell experience.
This might come across as a stupid question, but was it a moment that made you feel like you needed to control, and it was a conscious decision to then control that moment, or was it something that just sort of happened by, I guess, natural circumstances?
Yeah, I think the best way to describe it is that it crept up on me. I think it accumulates over time. I don't think it's exclusively this way for every person. And I think for a lot of people, there might be a sudden stressor. Some people talk about this one transformative moment that really turns something in their head. And this can be in both positive and negative ways. So for some people, recovery is like that. for me, recovery was that switch moment. A near-death experience. Whoa, that's not okay. And then getting on the kind of the journey of being like, okay, now I'm going to really invest in nourishing myself. But for me, the onset of the eating disorder was more gradual. So I remember the first experience was, just seeing this ad on TV of this person who was working out and talking about calories and all of these terminologies that can really get in your head as a teen, as a way to establish a sense of security and acceptance and feel good about yourself. All of these words are so magnetic at a time of your life when everything feels like chaos. And so I was just there learning about this vocabulary that would later then turn into kind of like a life buoy in a very, very wavy sea for me. So yeah, it just kind of accumulated over time of seeing more types of media, receiving more information about how I could achieve quote unquote success through these different types of eating and exercise regimes. And then over time it was just kind of snowballed into something that was not very adaptive.
Right, and I think this is really interesting to me because when we've done, again, you mentioned it before, we've done events in the past together, and when you've talked about this sort of journey and about how all of these, the snowball effect essentially happening when you were younger, a lot of students resonated massively with that, and that kind of caught me off guard because they would say things like, actually, a lot of these issues I've been having since I was 6 or 7 years old, around the language that parents would be talking about, at home, and how they should be approached in terms of their body image. And I remember some of these students we were speaking to were probably 13, 14, and you're thinking, holy moly, like you've been dealing with some of these issues for 8 years and you're only 14 years old. And that's why they were so passionate to talk about it. So I know I'm spending quite a bit of time in this younger age, but are you seeing that as a common trend?
You mean across age groups, or kind of in that sense?
In terms of a lot of issues coming from quite a young age.
Yeah, I think this actually is really interesting to think about how maybe the way to describe it is like when you start to develop potentially maladaptive coping mechanisms, it's like a light switch kind of a I'm not using the right analogy here, but maybe like a pot that's bubbling over. And it's been brewing for some time already. But then there's that moment where it just tips over. And I think that is probably the way to describe any kind of mental health condition, actually. Say, there are all of these factors that are just coming together and brewing and brewing and brewing. And you might have a stressor that comes out of left field. So I'm going to give a more concrete example. Let's say you have a biological predisposition to have higher levels of stress when something really stressful happens. And you might have parents who give you a lot of pressure. So your social environment is pretty toxic from a young age. And that kind of creates a sense of a tendency for you to be a perfectionist. You might be really scared of losing control. So your psychological landscape is kind of primed to snowball when the time is wrong. I didn't want to say that when the time is right, because that's, but essentially all of these things are primed for a stressor to really catch you off guard. And when something really stressful happens, let's say teenage years, there's the onset of teenage years, there's suddenly a huge exam that's coming up and you do poorly. Then you might have all of these, the perfect storm is created. Your soup is filled with all of these ingredients that are explosive. And then you'd switch on the heat a little bit more and everything just goes blah. So that's probably the best way to put it.
No, perfect metaphor. Totally understood it. And it's like, it's like, I understand what you mean. And I've used it quite often when you said it's like other mental health issues. I've used that same sort of metaphor with how I describe leaving the pot on when you're anxious, which leads to anxiety. And if you're not careful and the water spills over, that's when it becomes a panic attack. And understanding when that water starting to churn is already starting already where these warning signs are. So definitely correlation. I totally got it.
Yeah.
And the fascinating part for me is now then you've had a sort of this chaos forms, or these stressors rather can cause these issues. And then you said that it was really interesting that you found control in food. So what is this relationship between food and body image like?
Yeah. So I think I mentioned this really briefly earlier, but it's the idea that people don't always, food is not the exclusive way that people might establish a sense of control. So for some people, it could be coping in positive ways. So maybe finding a hobby that they enjoy, relieving that stress. It could be other harmful coping mechanisms like self-harm, or something that's not quite as helpful. So there are many ways that people can approach a really stressful scenario. But I think for me, and maybe a lot of young people resonate with this, especially those who grew up in Asian families. And this is a huge generalization, but I think that this is probably why I have had so many experiences of like the Me Too. I experienced this as well at home, or this is why food really resonated with me as a sense, or a tool for establishing control, is that it's such a central aspect of social relationships. The way that we, within Asian cultures, it's always the way that we start conversations with others. It's a way that we negotiate social relationships sometimes too. You sit down at the table and let's say your mom puts a plate on the table and you're like, no, I'm not having any of that, because you're mad, right? Or you've heard the classic story of like your mom is mad and then you have an argument and then later on she comes in with a plate of oranges. That's like a classic, Asian family, like Asian household scenario. And so you kind of get a sense of like, it's not like, oh, let's talk about this. It's like, here's my offering of oranges.
It's so true. And sometimes you might get lucky and get the ones that are already half cut in the skin so that it's easier to peel off. Those are when there's been some we're really trying to have a conversation because mom's been in the kitchen doing unnecessary work by peeling the skin half off as well. Yeah.
She's like, here's, I'm so sorry. Here you go.
I really don't want to talk about this. I spent an extra 25 minutes in the kitchen cutting these oranges. No, that's so true.
Exactly.
That's so true.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's really interesting because like a lot of people I did this research article a couple of years ago in undergrad and master's about the experiences of body image and kind of the relationship with food amongst Chinese young adult women. And it was just so interesting to see that like the meaning of food, there's so much symbolic value that comes with it. And people felt so conflicted about how to receive acceptance and to feel approved of by people around them. Because on the one hand, they're hearing from maybe more conventional societal messaging that they need to be smaller physically in order to fit in. But then there's also this very deep cultural norm, a deeply ingrained cultural norm that says, if you respect your family members, you'd eat more. And so both of these things are high stakes they're high stakes expectations. You want to achieve both because both of them kind of win you a sense of belonging. And so that was something I personally grappled with a lot. And I know that many people resonated with that. So yeah, I wanted to add that.
For sure. I mean, I feel like it's almost like scarring from my childhood around. Like I know that going on with mom, with her friends and family, because I'm a bigger guy, it would always be a topic of conversation, always, right? In any way, like oh, 你肥好多喎, like oh you got fatter, or like who wants to have more? Oh, Aaron will have more for sure. Like you know what I mean? And like you learn to take a pinch of salt, but no matter what, it's still kind of gets you a little bit. You know what I mean?
It stings. Yeah.
Definitely gets you a little bit. So, in saying that, how is that one of the biggest pressures that you've seen, especially around this whole idea of what you're meant to look like? I know that sounds crazy, but especially being, I guess, in your experience, I guess we can ask because we don't want to but in your
For
experiences
sure.
working with Body Banter, have you noticed it is more of a cultural thing with family and food that has caused a lot more of these issues?
Yeah. I'll try to unpack the many strands of thoughts that are coming to my head. um, but something that was really interesting for me to hear about was that um, because a lot of young people, I don't know if it was the same experience for you, Aaron, but like, whether you were allowed in the kitchen as a kid, and the sense of control or the lack of control that you have over what is served at dinner. So something that made a lot of, in conversation with some young people that I had worked with, was that a lot of times there would be anxiety over body image because on the one hand at school they might be hearing that you need to eat a certain way and this diet is right for you, but then you go home and what's served at the dinner table is a family platter. It's something that mom has made, and you're not allowed in the kitchen when you get home. Mom is probably cooking, or it's dinner is already kind of prepared for you. And if you don't eat it, it's remarkably disrespectful or considered very disrespectful. And there's just this discrepancy between what's being discussed at school as to what you should be eating, how you should be managing your weight, and what's actually the reality at home. And I think it takes a lot of time and also self awareness, understanding the different value systems that you have. Maybe it's that you really care about your family, and you realistically know that to be true. But it takes time to really understand. When I'm at home eating mom's food, I'm not letting go of what the school, what I've been hearing at school. I'm not letting go of part of myself. In fact, I'm maybe navigating different values, or prioritizing some values in certain situations. For example, at home, eating what mom makes because it means a lot to me. And at school, maybe, taking a dance class because I enjoy movement. But those aren't necessarily contradictory. You're not compensating for what you've been eating at home, not framing it that way, and instead seeing it as a prioritization of different values within different situations. So that's really helped me a lot personally, and framing it that way for a lot of young people I've spoken to. I think that's been helpful too, because instead of seeing it as a this or that, seeing it as a this and those can both be the case. I can respect both sides of the things I really value in my life. I guess that's how I
Yeah,
put it. Yeah.
that's great. And that you in a way stole one of the questions out of my mouth, because I was actually wanting to ask, like, how you, like, if someone who is in conflict of trying to balance that, how do you talk to them?
Hmm.
And so it's really nice to hear some of those examples of what you can do at home and what you can do at school to try to balance or navigate, as you said, those two worlds
Mm,
to gain some sort of balance there. Um, I know we've been talking a lot about food, and I'm that's why I wanted to shift a little bit, because I know that there's so much more to body image than just food. One of the things that
absolutely. Yeah.
a lot, and one of the topics that I wanted to sort of quickly ask about um, was the how in your line of work, or what you see, or whether it's from your own experience, is the pressures of being um, at school, or being in, or anyone really, and how you deal with body image, with, I guess, a heightened level of of resources like social media now adding to those sort of potential
Mm,
factors. Um, how do
yeah.
you go about your work when you're working with some students who are saying, I'm really conscious about my body image? How do I even go about my life?
Yeah. That's, you know, that's such a tough one, because when people are in that state of mind, and perhaps they've been operating in that way of thinking for a really long time, of being like, my body is, or my weight is something that I really need to control, or, these things are so important to me. How do I get out of that? Even just asking that question is already a step out. I think that's the first thing to acknowledge. If someone is able to verbalize, I don't think that this balance of the different parts of my life's pie it's serving me very well. If someone can verbalize that already, that's a massive step, because a lot of the time, this using these types of sense of control over food and body as a coping mechanism is quite invisible to to us because of the ways that it's so normalized in our societal discourse. You know, you see all of these ads that are like, you should be controlling your food and body. Everyone's like, what's the problem? And so I think when people are able, first of all, just to acknowledge that, that's already huge. And then the second thing to, right after that acknowledgement, it's a process, I think, of, as I like to put it, diversifying your life's pie. So thinking about ways to really restore the balance between the different things that you're keeping in your life. And again, this is much easier said than done. So, previously, if you can imagine that pie chart, right, it has maybe three segments to it. It's like exercise, food, weight, or something that you've really prioritized in your sense of self. And over time, you start to maybe put in, let's say, taking a dance class. This is my personal favorite example, because dancing this year and taking dance classes has really healed my relationship with my body in many, many ways. Adding that into my life is something that is really joyful, that I frankly am very bad at, but I enjoy to the nth degree. I'm just like, yeah. And it's that pure joy of moving in my body that I've really, really found to be very valuable. And I think the way to restore balance really will differ for every person. But as people start to recognize that, first of all, these three, the limited space that I'm giving to other things other than these three slices is not serving me. And what are some things I can slowly add back into my life and slowly expand the amount of space that I give, or the prioritization of that in my sense of self, the kind of, the ratio that it takes up in my life's pie. So yeah, did that kind of address the question?
Yeah, and it's making sense to me a lot, because I'm currently training for this walk and talk that I'm doing in October, and it's becoming a big challenge and for me. But it's interesting about this, and why I'm understanding is the adding that physical side. So dance for you, but for me, it's been walking, and it's the consistency of showing up for yourself. I've been calling it kind of like raising my floor. Everyone sort of talks about raising the roof, but I want to raise my floor so that I feel like whenever I'm in a bad spot, I'm here as opposed to here, and that consistency of the physical has given me more understanding of my body, of what it's capable of doing, and also be more proud of it as a, wow, like, you can see the changes, or you can see the fact that you can do certain things, and it's changing in front of you, right? My legs are hurting more than ever, but it's interesting to understanding more about yourself. And so when you mentioned it, it totally made sense to me, because then it triggered my nutrition, and it would trigger my sleep, and it would trigger other aspects to my life that would change certain things. And like you said, it's not just one aspect. It's not just food and that's it. It's interesting in the Asian culture, where we grow up, both having understanding that the Asian family dynamic of how important food is, and how it plays in society and with our family. But there's so many aspects to it that it's really interesting hearing you talk about it. The one part I would really like to delve into, I know we're in terms of time, and and I feel like I can always talk with you forever, but what's been really nice is hearing about sort of a lot of your training, getting how the issues came, then how to sort of address it. One thing that I would really like to finish on from this episode is going back to a topic that you talked about regarding framework and and also language. So for someone not dealing with, or institutions, schools, how can we change our framework? How can we change our language so that people who are suffering don't have to go through such prolonged periods of time before they start to seek help? So I guess that's my long question is, what is good framework? How can we create better framework so that people have they feel that they can be themselves to address these issues?
Hmm. Yeah, like I think a good way to start here might be to think about. I know we had talked about body positivity as one of the most popular ways that people start on maybe recuperating their relationships with their bodies and finding more compassion. So maybe I could speak a little bit to body positivity and that the way that that's framed, and then body acceptance and body neutrality,
Mhm.
and so people can get a sense of maybe there are different ways to find a sense of compassion. So I think body positivity, maybe it kind of speaks for itself, or the more conventional way that people have heard about this particular approach. And the way that I understand it is it's more this celebratory approach. I would say it's the loudest of the body image approaches. If I had to describe it in a song, it would be Christina Aguilera's I Am Beautiful. So she goes, I am beautiful, no
Yeah,
matter
yeah,
what they say. So
yeah.
you kind of get this loud and proud I'm happy regardless of what anyone says. And
Right.
then you have a little bit of the maybe the toned down version a little bit of of the body image approaches. You have body acceptance, and that is really acknowledging that there will be days where you will struggle with your experience, with your body image experiences, and that there are moments where you will feel really bad about your perceived flaws, but managing the sense of the acknowledging that the mood is not attached to the physical appearance and is more of a reflection of something that might be going on for you right now. Maybe
Mm.
it's a stressful time that you've been going through, and having the coping tools to maybe um, to accept that there will be different emotional states in response to your physical appearance. So that is, I think, the second layer of the body image approaches. I think everyone starts at body positivity. Most people I know who have experienced body image struggles will start with body positivity, because you have to swing a little bit to the extreme end to really find confidence. And that's really been the case for me. And then there's the second layer of maybe a more mature emotional state of finding that sense of, hey, there will be days that are tough. I'll feel crappy sometimes, and I will have the tools to accept all those emotional states I feel toward my body, and I will not compromise the respect I give to it just because I feel differently about my body on one day versus the other. And then
What?
there's a third approach that, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No,
Just
I
went on
really
a
want,
roll.
before you get to the third one, you mentioned coping
Yeah.
tools. What are an example of a coping tool that you would use for body acceptance?
Yeah, I think that experience of something that's been helpful for me on, let's say, a day where it's just, I feel quite crappily, quite crappily about
You're
my
one of the
body
only
is
people who can make crap sound like a great thing. Crappily. I don't even know how to do it.
crappily.
Crappily.
It's like I'm holding a teacup and like
Yeah,
passing it to you.
yeah. When you feel
So I'm feeling quite crappily.
crappily. So when you're feeling quite,
Sounds like a
yeah,
snack.
no, I mean, yeah,
Right? Yeah.
yeah. So go on. Sorry,
um,
when you're feeling, yeah,
crappily about your body.
yeah.
Something that I've been really appreciating is um, there is usually an inclination or if I'm feeling not so great, is like, oh, I need to go and compensate for something I ate, or I'm going to do something that's punitive. And the initial instinct is to do that when I'm feeling quite negatively about my body.
Mm,
Whether that's a physical sensation, maybe I'm like, oh, I feel bloated, or I'm not so happy with that particular part of my body or something. I need to burn it off, or there's like a punitive approach to it. I do the opposite of whatever that particular voice is telling me about that I need to be doing. Let's say it's like, okay, so you need to hit the gym now, or there's this very mean voice in my head. Then I'll go for a walk, maybe something that's the opposite of the angry approach. Maybe I feel that the kind of the deep need in me is to get some movement, and I am feeling restless. So instead of seeing it as a way to compensate or to address, to like kind of listen to that mean voice, I treat myself with a kinder approach instead, to combat and to kind of
mm,
address it in a different way. So that's been really helpful for me, because it's giving space for that emotion to exist as well. It's not saying, oh, I don't feel crappily. It's I feel crappily and I'm going to do something that is going to hold space while, relieving that experience a little bit as well, or that feeling rather, that emotion, relieving that a little bit. Yeah.
Thank you. That's great. Thanks for sharing that. That's a great tool. That's awesome. And I didn't mean to cut you off in your trail. And you were about to
it's okay.
Body positivity, body acceptance, and the last one.
And body neutrality. So this is for there are some people who I've spoken to who have felt very exhausted by even just focusing on any physical appearance aspects or working toward a place of being more accepting toward the physical aspects of their bodies. So for these people who might feel like, oh, I just need to change the approach entirely, it's usually helpful to latch onto body neutrality, because this particular approach removes that emphasis entirely or almost entirely from physical appearance and says, what does your body do for you on a daily basis? How does it show up for you? So does it help you give people good hugs? Does it help you hike? Does it help you prepare for the walk and talk? All of these experiences of how does it show up for me? What is the role of my body in helping me do the things I love? And so I think if I had to describe my current approach to body image or my relationship with my body, I'd say it's probably a mix of body acceptance and body neutrality, because there are days where I'm too exhausted to think about, oh, I need to accept, or like the I Am Beautiful song is too loud for me. There are too many feelings brewing in my mind. And I just need to be able to appreciate that my body is alive and kicking. And that's the best way to establish a more compassionate relationship with it. So yeah, those are the three. Those three I most resonate with.
That's great. Thanks for laying it out so eloquently, because it really does make sense. And when you were just even mentioning that at the end of the body neutrality, I think a lot about even athletes that I've spoken to. And they're such at peace with whatever their body ends up looking like, because it doesn't even matter. It's more around how am I performing with it, and whatever my body looks like is whatever it is. And they're so not fussed with how it looks like. It's almost this confidence of like, wow, like the fact that they're like, oh yeah, I'm this tall, and like what's amazing is speaking to Camille, who's the Olympic swimmer for Hong Kong. She's stunning.
She's so cool.
She's confident, got big, broad shoulders, and she's very confident in who she is. And that is such an amazing trait when you see someone like that, because there's no worry about what she's meant to look like. She's thinking about how for me. So I think it's a great place to be in terms of that neutrality.
Absolutely.
So yeah, I thank you for breaking it down that way. And before we my final thing is, and again, you talked about it at the very beginning, because I want to try and get my podcast the same way. And it's around the mental health side of it, in the sense of, for us in our generation, we never grew up with any sort of education around mental health. At school, there was nothing around it for us. Our friends didn't even know what was going on with mental health. But now it's starting to become it's becoming a trend. And that's kind of been also forced through COVID. There's been a lot of negative trends because of it, but there's also a lot of positive things around it. If there was one thing that you could hope around the space of mental health can continue to grow in a positive space, what would you hope that could be?
Wow, I love that question. So like maybe what my vision for a future where maybe what my vision for a future would be. Would that be a good way to framework the question?
It could be as simple as or as complicated as, I would like a government policy that could do this. I would say more people to talk about it. Whatever you feel is something that in the space that you've seen around mental health, what is one trait that you've seen works magic that you hope can grow?
Yeah, this is such a lovely question. And I think something as simple as asking someone how they're doing and really meaning it would be a game changer, even in the simplest way. You know, something that I've really enjoyed doing, coming back to Hong Kong, and I came back because COVID had kind of ravaged the world at the time when I was doing my master's in the U.S. And I've been in Hong Kong for a couple of years and really started to feel more at home here again. And recently, I've been experimenting with saying Cantonese phrases or translations of English phrases that I really like to say, but then that don't really have a translation in Cantonese, like "have a great day." And I'll say things to people these random people in the street and being like, "Oh, 我希望你有個好好嘅日." I hope you have a great day. And it doesn't have this conversational framework in Hong Kong, and people give me funny looks. But it meant people are like, what is that? And recently someone said it back to me, the security guard downstairs, and it was one of the best. It was one of the best moments I've ever had. And I just really think if we could have even just these everyday greetings where people feel checked in on and feel cared for and are able to have a short but meaningful conversation. It's not to say the longer, deeper ones aren't important, but it's also to say that I don't think we check in on each other enough on a daily basis or let people know that we care about them. So if I could envision a future where people could do that regularly with their loved ones, with people around them, it would really make a difference, I think. Yeah.
I love that. Thank you. That is the end, and I think, and it is a great message to share, because when people do feel like they're checked in on, that little conversation, or when someone feels that you care just a little bit, it just instills just a little piece of hope. And you never know if someone's having a really bad day and what that means. So I'm glad that security guard did that, and that just goes to show you, the more that we do that, if it becomes one security guard, and then it could become 5 and 10, and they could do it to someone else, and all of a sudden it just starts to spread that. So thank you, and thank you for the work you do. Thank you for being a great example, especially for the youth, to change this landscape around what body image means, and not just that, but the correlation around that with mental health. So keep up the good work. We're all big fans of what you do. And
likewise, I'm always the biggest fan of Talking Mental.
Thank you for taking the time, Steph. Really appreciate it.
Totally.